I'm a pretty simple guy. That's probably why I like comic art, because comic art is simple. It's not highfalutin, fancy, technical art that you see in a gallery or a museum somewhere. It's art that tells a story and ideally should be told in a very clear manner for anyone to be able to make sense of. Now, comic art is simple. At its core, it's simple art, but that doesn't make it easy. In fact, some of the simplest things to do are oftentimes the hardest things to do. And the more you draw comics or try to draw comics, the more you realize just trying to compose one comic book panel can be a very complicated and difficult thing to do. How do you fit all those elements in there? Oftentimes there's characters, there's backgrounds, there's sound effects, there's word balloons, there's narration boxes, and that's just one panel. In a comic book, you got to string a whole bunch of these panels together to tell a story. So it's a really difficult thing to be able to do, no matter how simple the medium itself may be. So if you get overwhelmed when trying to compose a panel and fit all of these things in there without it feeling super crammed, this video may be for you. In this video, we're going to be studying a panel by John Romita Sr. Anytime you're looking to get better at something, it's good to look to the people who are really, really good at doing that thing and try and figure out how they did it. So as far as comics go, John Romita Sr. was a master of the craft. So if you're going to try and study from anyone, he's definitely one of the ones to study from. In this video, I'm going to try and break down some of the genius of his panel construction, and I'm going to do like I often do in my sketchbook, just copy it. I found that it's one of the better ways for me to learn how to do these things is just to copy stuff. So in this video, I'll be copying this really awesome Spider-Man panel featuring the Vulture by John Romita Sr. So I'm going to stop talking and start drawing. Let's get into it. Okay, so here we have an original sheet of comic page by John Romita Sr. This is actually not the original sheet. If it were, I'd have it probably framed and not just casually on my drawing board, but this is part of a really awesome and amazing John Romita Sr. artist edition. I've made a video going through this book before, but I look at artist editions as an investment in my education in a lot of ways. Right now, I'm going to be using it as a textbook / workbook, where I'm just going to do a full-scale study of one of these amazing panels by John Romita Sr. So I'm just working on a 11 by 17 sheet of Bristol board paper. This is a vellum finish for anyone who's interested. John Romita Sr. back in these days was working a little bit bigger than this. As you can see, this is 11 by 17. So I would say 13.5 by 18.5 roughly is the size that his live drawing area was. But I just took this sheet of paper and I ruled it out so that the panels at least are the exact same size. So this is a study, just like you would do a study of a Rembrandt painting in a museum, or like on this channel where I've done sketchbook studies of illustrators whose work I really admire. This is really no different. Just like a painting has formal elements that make up its composition, a comic panel is really no different. With comics though, each panel is a part of a whole. Each panel is helping tell a continuous sequential story. So some panels are going to have more going on in them than other panels. Some panels are going to show more backgrounds. Some panels are going to be more close-ups. And when you're drawing comics, you kind of have to know how to oscillate between all of those different options, using whatever one is going to serve the story best. In this demonstration, I'm going to be talking less about storytelling and more about the composition of a panel. I'm sure storytelling stuff will come up just because that's the nature of comic art. But this demonstration is really going to focus much more on how to arrange all of these elements within a panel and not make it feel cramped and squished. It sometimes seems impossible in a lot of ways. But when you look at a master like John Romita, it seems very effortless and easy. And it's one thing to just sort of look at it and study it, which is a really great way to figure out how these artists go about creating such flawless panels. But then to take it another step further, I think it's really important to do your own version of it, to literally copy what they did. Okay, so I just roughed in the narration box and the word balloons here. Not getting super accurate with the actual shape of the word balloons. It's more just about how much space they're actually taking up. And even in this study right here, I'm sort of trying to just get used to the size at which he's drawing this character. I would be probably much more inclined to draw this character larger and perhaps crop some of the figure. But again, it's that space that I'm looking for, how he's utilizing the negative space, how he's keeping enough breathing room while not making it feel overly simplistic at all. So right now, at least, my goal is really just to kind of block in some of these shapes before I even start thinking about the details of the figures and all the intricacies. For me, copying better helps me understand why an artist made the choices that they made. Because the whole time I'm kind of fighting my own instincts, my own artistic inclinations to draw something a certain way or to place something in a certain area. And when doing a study, I'm trying to be as accurate as I can to their composition. And whenever you're doing a study, if ever you do find yourself kind of fighting your own inclinations, I think that's a really good thing because I think it means that you picked the right artist to work from, an artist that is not exactly like you. And the other reason why it's good to feel that sort of struggle and fight is it just means you're kind of stretching your abilities, pushing yourself to do something that you otherwise wouldn't. The other thing that these artists back then, I think more so than today, were very much tuned into was the reproduction process. The reproduction wasn't as smooth and seamless as it is today. There were a lot of limitations on reproducing comic art. And so they knew that this stuff was going to get shrunk down really, really small, a lot smaller than they were drawing it originally. And so that's why they were very conscious of keeping ample negative space within that panel. Because otherwise, if this panel got too busy, perhaps if this Spider-Man figure was too big, taking up more of this foreground, it would butt against some of the word balloons and the dialogue. There wouldn't be enough room for some of these visual effects. And when it would get shrunk down, it would be a lot harder to read. It would look a lot more cluttered. It's also one of the reasons why their lines were so brushy and bold back then, because they knew that after it would get reproduced and shrunk down and in some instances added color to, they didn't want those drawings to lose their impact, which they very easily could have. So in many ways, they really had no other choice but then to say more with less. Even the way, if you look here, the way he kind of just rendered those feathers in the vulture's costume here. These are just almost like warm-up lines that you would make with your brush when you're warming up the brush. He's just making a series of those because when it gets shrunk down, it'll look much more intricate. But if he was to get really intricate with it from the start at this size, by the time it would shrink down, it would just perhaps probably look muddy. So clarity was the key with so much of their stuff. Their style in many ways was just dictated by clarity. And I think with today's digital capabilities, our printing is a lot better. A lot of us are drawing on screens. It's hard to stay disciplined in that regard. It's very easy to get kind of seduced into using a bunch of extra lines and detail that might not necessarily be needed. Obviously, everybody has a different style, and some styles are more rendered than others. But there's a practical aspect of comics that I really like, and that is that oftentimes our styles are very much dictated by the limitations of the process of making comics. Not only the amount of time that we generally have, which usually isn't much, but also the size at which it finally gets printed. Even today, oftentimes we're reading comics on a phone, or at least the retailers that are looking to order a comic might be looking at some sample art on their phone or on their iPad or something like that. So you want everything to look clear at a very, very small size. So perhaps it's even more necessary for us nowadays to be thinking this way, because our work is going to be seen even smaller than the printed comic size in many instances. Okay, so I blocked in the two figures and some of this foreground element here, but as I'm looking at it, you could see where, as much as I was trying to stay as true to his composition as I could in terms of character placement and size relationships, I still fell short where the vulture is a lot bigger than the vulture is here. And it's coming a lot closer to the edge in my version, leaving me a lot less room to add that real nice swooping motion line. And there's very little room down here to add in these buildings. So that's what I sort of meant in terms of fighting my own kind of artistic inclinations in terms of size relationships and composition. Again, the point of this study is really to utilize that space as economically as possible, the way John Romita Sr. did, by leaving all that beautiful white negative space in between all of these elements. And in my really quick, roughed version here, it doesn't have that same airy, ample amount of white negative space. So I think the thing to do for me right now is just to kind of erase this vulture character and make him a little bit smaller. Perhaps I'll indicate where the buildings go first, and then I can work against that. I've said this before, and I know that most people who are probably watching this video are either aspiring comic artists, or someone with some sort of interest in comic art and illustration. But doing exercises like this and kind of studying comic art to some extent and getting your hands dirty with it, I think is beneficial for any art discipline. And that's mainly because comic art really calls for you as an artist to be able to draw everything. All the fundamentals of art making are really present, even just within one panel of a comic. You have, right now, I'm sort of wrestling with anatomy and figure construction. Then you have elements of perspective, obviously composition, which we're talking about a lot in this video. And then of course you have storytelling, how to make something read clearly. I think it really will push you to become a better artist. Okay, so this version is a lot better in terms of its composition and the accuracy to the original, but I'm still falling short just a little bit here where things are coming very much closer to the edges of other things as they do in the original. Once again, it's just a reminder that when you look at a panel like this, you might appreciate and realize the importance of white space and negative space and creating depth between characters by just having a bigger character and a smaller character. But it's not until you actually try and do it yourself by actually copying it, you realize how hard it really is. And perhaps how much you actually have to step out of your own vantage point as far as arranging and composing a panel goes. So like I mentioned, this panel is really cool because without really having to do all that much perspective, he's able to show depth within this scene. When you're drawing on tight deadlines the way these guys were, oftentimes working on more than one comic a month, you had to create these shorthands in terms of creating space and depth, creating worlds, action, and you had to do it in a economy of line kind of approach. Not only did you not have the time to kind of render these things endlessly, but like I mentioned before, when this stuff would get shrunk down and then printed, it would do it a disservice in the end. Just another reminder that the function of comic books oftentimes dictates the style and aesthetic of the work. A lot of times today, us modern artists kind of work the opposite way. We kind of think of a style and an aesthetic first and try to cram it into the comic. Whereas I think a lot of times it was reversed back in the day. And it's not until you try to do a study of this do you really realize how complicated and intricate this process really was, and how much they were able to simplify all these bigger ideas into these shorthand ways of drawing that really served the final product and allowed them to draw this stuff very, very regularly at a pretty fast pace. Okay, so since I have the basic placement and composition down very roughly, in order to go a little bit deeper into some of the stylistic flares and to try to get more of the full effect of the genius of John Romita's panel work, I'm going to kind of try and detail this and bring it to life a little bit more. Naturally, I'm going to interject some of my own style flourishes and artistic sensibilities, but already working within this very specific composition that is very opposite to my normal approach, it'll be interesting to try and render and detail within this very specific framework. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to take my mechanical pencil and just detail a little bit and just kind of see what it turns into. And doing studies like this for me is helpful because for at least a few seconds, I can look at it and kind of pretend that I just drew this myself. And I know that sounds a little crazy and weird, but I think that's one of the points of doing a study. Even though you're copying another artist's work, and oftentimes, certainly in my case, it's a very humble interpretation and it pales in comparison to the original, even though all of that, seeing something like this come out of your hand on a paper that you drew it on, it's kind of encouraging and makes it feel like the skill level that you want to eventually attain, it's not as far as you might think it may be. And it's just a matter of applying some of these things that you're learning to your own work so that without having to copy another artist's work, you're able to get that same level of professional finish, clarity, dynamism, all those ingredients that really make strong, interesting comic art. All of that stuff eventually will just come out of you naturally. At least that's the way I look at doing studies. Art is one of the rare instances where we could actually do that. I think I've mentioned this before in a previous video about doing studies, but if you want to dunk a ball like LeBron or something like that, there's really no way to feel what that might be like before you're able to actually do it. Whereas in art, you can do a study. And you could, at least for a controlled amount of time, feel what it might be like to draw a specific way and create a specific composition. So as I move on in my art career and as I try and develop more and more as an artist, studies for that reason, amongst many others, have really become a big part of my education. And the more I do studies like this and the more I try to push myself to learn from the masters, the more I realize there's just so much more to learn. So in many ways it's a humbling experience, but in other ways it's very encouraging. All right, that's it for this video. I hope you learned a little bit of something from John Romita Sr. as to how to create a really clear, exciting piece of sequential art. If you would like to see a part 2 of this, where I actually ink this panel and perhaps even do some lettering on it, let me know in the comments below. I don't know when you're going to be watching this video, but currently it is the month of February, and I created a February month-long drawing challenge called 28 Panels. For this challenge, myself and some of you have been doing a daily panel of comics every day for the whole month of February. It's been really fun. It's also been really challenging, but it's allowed me to put a real emphasis on comic book storytelling and has created a really great excuse for me to really take a deep dive into the art of comic making, specifically from a traditional art perspective. I've been making comic book art for many years now, but 98% of the work that I've created, professionally at least, has been done digitally. And though I think digital art is fantastic and really does serve a purpose in many ways, it's not as creatively and artistically satisfying to me. And ultimately, I feel like it doesn't give me the kind of look and feel that I want in my comics. So I'm really trying to push myself to create comics traditionally more and more. And this particular month-long challenge has been perfect for that. It's kind of the reason why I created it. So if you're watching this currently in February and you want to join in on the fun, check out my Instagram. That's where we're doing all of these daily panels. I'm posting mine, I'm posting some of yours. The daily word prompt list that we're working off of is also over there. And if you're watching this after the fact, that stuff will be saved somewhere in a highlight on my Instagram page, or you could always message me personally if you want a copy of that word prompt list. Whether it's February or some other month, it might be helpful for you if you're interested in making comics, getting better at making comics, to challenge yourself by doing one panel of comics a day. So anyway, if you would like to see that part 2, let me know in the comments. I would love to ink and perhaps letter this piece and talk about whatever challenges might come up with those 2 disciplines. Anyway, that's all I got for now. Thanks so much for watching. If you did like this video and got something out of it, please do hit that like button. It really helps the channel and the algorithm and all that. If you're not subscribed, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button. If you know someone that might benefit from a video like this, send it over to them. Sharing videos like this definitely helps the channel as well, so I appreciate that. And that's all I got. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.